The dust-laden winds of Caldwell, Texas, carried the weight of Eleanor Lane's secrets as she stepped off the stagecoach in the summer of 1875. Her hands trembled despite the scorching heat, though she hid them quickly in the folds of her travel-worn skirt. The bruises on her wrists had faded to a sickly yellow, but the memories that accompanied them remained as vivid as ever. She adjusted her bonnet, lifted her chin, and painted a smile on her face that never quite reached her eyes, a mask she'd perfected over the past 2 years of her disastrous marriage. The small frontier town sprawled before her, a collection of wooden structures fighting against the vast wilderness that threatened to reclaim them at any moment. Eleanor took a deep breath. Caldwell would be her sanctuary or her grave. There would be no returning to Philadelphia, no going back to the man who had promised love but delivered only pain. "First time in Caldwell, madam." The driver set her trunk down beside her, his weathered face creasing into a friendly smile. "Yes," Eleanor replied, maintaining her practiced smile. "My cousin owns the millinery shop. I'm to help her with the business." It was a lie, of course. She had no cousin here, only a carefully saved bundle of money, a new name, and desperate determination. What Eleanor did have was skill with a needle and thread, and the hope that a town on the Texas frontier might need a seamstress enough not to ask too many questions. "That'd be Miss Thompson's place, then," the driver nodded, pointing down the dusty Main Street. 2 buildings past the saloon, right side. Eleanor thanked him and reached for her trunk, but the weight of it proved too much for her still healing ribs. She stumbled slightly, keeping the wince from her face through sheer force of will. "Allow me, madam." The deep voice came from behind, startling Eleanor enough that she nearly lost her composure. She turned to find herself looking up into the face of a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark hair curled slightly beneath a well-worn Stetson, and despite the pistol holstered at his hip, there was something gentle in his gaze that made her heart flutter in a way she'd thought impossible after Thomas. "I couldn't impose," she managed, her smile firmly in place. "Preston O'Malley," he introduced himself, tipping his hat. "Sheriff of this little piece of heaven or hell, depending on the day." A slight smile curved his lips. "And it's no imposition. Where are you headed?" Eleanor hesitated. The sheriff. Of all people, the last one she wanted to notice her. Men of authority had always sided with Thomas, her respectable, wealthy, charming husband, never with the wife who exaggerated and misunderstood his temper. "The millinery shop," she answered, gesturing vaguely. "My cousin, Miss Thompson." Preston's eyebrow arched slightly. Interesting, since Harriet Thompson never mentioned having a cousin coming to visit, and in a town this size, that would be news worth sharing. Fear flooded Eleanor's veins, though her smile never faltered. Perhaps she wanted it to be a surprise. "Perhaps," the sheriff agreed, though his eyes, perceptive and thoughtful, suggested he wasn't convinced. He lifted her trunk with ease. "Let me escort you there, miss." Lane, Eleanor Lane. At least that much was true. She'd returned to her maiden name the moment the stagecoach had carried her away from Philadelphia. As they walked down the main street, Eleanor was acutely aware of the curious glances from the townspeople they passed. A new face was always a source of interest in small communities, and she felt exposed despite her modest attire and carefully maintained expression. "You'll find Caldwell has a way of knowing everyone's business before they know it themselves," Preston remarked conversationally. "Not much happens here that doesn't become talk by sundown." The warning was gentle but clear. Eleanor's heart sank. Perhaps she should have chosen a more remote location, somewhere even farther from civilization. "I'm not one for gossip, Sheriff O'Malley," she replied, keeping her tone light. "Most folks who say that have something to hide," he observed, glancing sideways at her with those penetrating eyes. Before she could formulate a response, they arrived at a neat storefront with a display window showcasing several fashionable hats. A bell tinkled as Preston pushed the door open, still carrying her trunk. Inside, a slender woman with graying hair pinned severely at the nape of her neck looked up from her work. Surprise registered on her face at the sight of them. "Sheriff, what can I do for you today?" Her eyes moved curiously to Eleanor. "Miss Thompson, this young lady claims to be your cousin," Preston said, setting the trunk down carefully. "Says she's come to help with your shop." Harriet Thompson's confusion was evident, and Eleanor felt her carefully constructed plan crumbling beneath her feet. "I'm afraid there must be some mistake. I don't have—" "I lied," Eleanor interrupted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Her smile remained fixed, though she felt it strain at the edges. "I apologize for the deception. I'm actually a seamstress looking for work. I heard Caldwell was growing and thought there might be an opportunity for someone with my skills." She turned to the milliner. "I truly am sorry for the presumption, madam. I needed a fresh start." Harriet Thompson studied Eleanor for a long moment, her expression unreadable. The sheriff crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe, his gaze never leaving Eleanor's face. "A seamstress, you say?" Harriet finally asked. "Let me see your hands." Eleanor extended her hands, and the older woman examined them carefully, noting the calluses and tiny scars that told the story of countless hours with needle and thread. "You've done fine work," Harriet observed. "And as it happens, I've been considering expanding into dressmaking. The ladies of Caldwell have been requesting it for some time." Relief washed over Eleanor. "I can show you samples of my work. I brought patterns, and that won't be necessary just yet." Harriet glanced at the sheriff, then back to Eleanor. "There's a room above the shop. It's small, but it's yours if you want it. We can discuss terms after you've settled in." Preston straightened, surprise evident on his face. "Harriet, you don't know anything about this woman." "I know she has a seamstress's hands and desperation in her eyes, despite that pretty smile she's hiding behind," Harriet replied firmly. "Sometimes that's enough to be going on with." The milliner's perceptiveness startled Eleanor, and for a moment her smile faltered. "You don't have to pretend with me, child," Harriet said more gently. "Everyone in Caldwell has a past. It's what you do with your future that matters here." Eleanor felt tears threatening and blinked them away quickly. "Thank you, Miss Thompson. I won't disappoint you." The sheriff still looked skeptical, but he nodded respectfully to Harriet. "Your choice, of course." He turned to Eleanor. "Welcome to Caldwell, Miss Lane. I hope you find what you're looking for here." As he left, the bell above the door jingling in his wake, Eleanor caught his final, searching look. She had the unsettling feeling that Sheriff Preston O'Malley wasn't done with her, yet that somehow he could see through the careful smile to the fear beneath. "Don't mind him," Harriet said, following Eleanor's gaze. "The sheriff takes his responsibilities seriously. Ever since the trouble with the Blackwater gang last year, he's been cautious about newcomers." "Blackwater gang?" Eleanor asked, grateful for the change in subject. "Nasty bunch of outlaws. They terrorized the county for months before Preston and his deputies finally drove them out." Harriet reached for Eleanor's trunk. "But that's old news. Let me show you to your room, and then we can discuss how this arrangement might work for both of us." As Eleanor followed Harriet up a narrow staircase at the back of the shop, she felt the first genuine stirring of hope. Perhaps here, in this dusty Texas town, she might finally escape Thomas's shadow. Perhaps here, she might eventually learn to stop smiling when she wanted to scream. What she didn't know was that Sheriff Preston O'Malley had recognized something in her eyes that he knew all too well: the haunted look of someone running from ghosts. and Preston O'Malley had never been one to let sleeping ghosts lie. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity as Eleanor settled into life in Caldwell. Harriet had been true to her word, allowing Eleanor to set up a small dressmaking business within the millinery shop. Word spread quickly about the skilled new seamstress, and soon Eleanor found herself with a steady stream of customers eager for new dresses, alterations, and mending. She kept to herself mostly, polite, but distant with the townspeople who came to her with their fabric and their gossip. The women of Caldwell were curious about the elegant newcomer with the practiced smile and the Eastern accent she couldn't quite disguise, but Eleanor deflected personal questions with gentle skill, turning conversations back to hemlines and fabric choices. Despite her caution, she gradually became familiar with the rhythms of the small town. She learned that the general store owner, Arthur Jenkins, watered down his whiskey but was generous with credit during hard times. That the town doctor, Frederick Winslow, had a weakness for penny dreadfuls and kept a collection hidden in his office. That the school teacher, Margaret Wilson, was sweet on the blacksmith who never seemed to notice her lingering glances. And she learned, through careful observation rather than gossip, that Sheriff Preston O'Malley was as respected as he was feared by the less lawful elements of Caldwell society. He was fair, the townspeople said, but uncompromising when it came to justice. A man who'd faced down outlaws and cattle rustlers without flinching, yet tipped his hat to every lady he passed, and never missed Sunday service at the small white church on the edge of town. Eleanor saw him frequently, as the sheriff's office was just across the street from Harriet's shop. Sometimes, she would glance up from her sewing to find him watching the millinery from his porch, those storm-gray eyes thoughtful beneath the brim of his hat. Whenever their gazes met, she would smile her perfect, meaningless smile and look away, her heart racing with an emotion she couldn't quite name. It wasn't until the first Saturday in July, nearly a month after her arrival, that she spoke to him again. Eleanor had been working late, finishing a special order for the banker's wife, an elaborate evening gown for the upcoming Independence Day celebration. Harriet had already retired to her own quarters at the back of the building, leaving Eleanor alone with her needle and thread in the pool of lamplight. The knock at the shop door startled her so badly that she pricked her finger, a bright bead of blood welling up against her pale skin. Through the window, she could see Sheriff O'Malley's tall figure silhouetted against the darkening street. After a moment's hesitation, she moved to unlock the door, opening it just enough to speak through the gap. "Sheriff, is something wrong?" "No, madam," Preston replied, removing his hat. "Just noticed the light and thought it unusual. Most businesses closed hours ago." "I have an order to finish," Eleanor explained, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance, tendrils of hair escaping her usually neat bun, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows. "Seems like you've been burning the midnight oil most nights," he observed. "Harriet works you too hard." Eleanor shook her head. "Not at all. I'm grateful for the work. Grateful enough to skip meals." At her puzzled expression, he continued, "I notice you don't often make it to the dining room at the hotel, and Harriet mentioned you're not eating much." Heat rose to Eleanor's cheeks. "I wasn't aware my eating habits were a matter of public interest, Sheriff." A slight smile crossed his face. "Like I told you, Miss Lane, not much happens in Caldwell that doesn't become talk, especially when it concerns a mysterious Eastern lady who appeared out of nowhere and never speaks of her past." "There's nothing mysterious about me," she protested, her smile firmly in place despite the flutter of panic in her chest. Preston studied her for a long moment. "That smile of yours," he finally said, his voice softer. "It never reaches your eyes. Did you know that?" The observation, delivered so matter-of-factly, struck Eleanor like a physical blow. She felt her carefully constructed facade waver, a crack appearing in the porcelain mask she'd worn for so long. "I don't know what you mean," she managed, though her voice lacked conviction. "I think you do." Preston placed his hat back on his head. "There's a social tomorrow after church. The whole town will be there. Might be a good opportunity for you to meet more of the folks whose clothes you're mending." The abrupt change of subject threw her. "I'm not much for socializing, so I've noticed." His eyes were kind but penetrating. "Thing is, Miss Lane, people who keep too much to themselves tend to draw more attention, not less. And I get the feeling attention is something you're trying to avoid." Eleanor remained silent, unsure how to respond to his unexpected perception. "The social starts at 2, Preston continued when she didn't speak. "I'd be honored to escort you if you'd allow it." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Because everyone deserves a chance to belong somewhere," he replied simply. "Even those who think they don't." With that, he tipped his hat and turned to leave, pausing only to add over his shoulder, "And Miss Lane, you don't have to smile for my benefit. Sometimes it's braver to let people see what you're really feeling." Eleanor stood in the doorway long after he'd disappeared down the darkened street, her heart pounding against her ribs. Sheriff Preston O'Malley saw too much, and that made him dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with the pistol at his hip. The next morning, Eleanor rose early, her mind still unsettled by the sheriff's invitation. She dressed carefully in a modest blue gown of her own making, the collar high enough to hide the fading yellow of old bruises on her collarbone. She pinned her hair in a simple but elegant style, and added a touch of rose water, a small luxury she allowed herself with her first earnings from the shop. As she walked the short distance to the church, Eleanor debated whether to attend the social afterward. Part of her wanted to decline, to maintain the careful distance she'd established between herself and the townspeople. Yet another part, a part she'd thought long dead after 2 years with Thomas, yearned for connection, for the simple pleasure of conversation and company without fear. The church service passed in a blur, the minister's words about forgiveness and new beginnings washing over her like water on parched earth. Eleanor found herself seated 2 rows behind Sheriff O'Malley, watching the straight set of his shoulders and the respectful incline of his head during prayers. Once, he turned slightly, his gaze finding hers unerringly across the small sanctuary, and the ghost of a smile touched his lips before he turned back to the pulpit. When the service ended, the congregation spilled out into the churchyard where tables had been set up beneath the shade of old oak trees. Children ran laughing through the grass, while women arranged dishes of food and men gathered in small groups, discussing cattle prices and the persistent drought. Eleanor hesitated at the edge of the gathering, her practiced smile firmly in place though her hands trembled slightly at her sides. Before she could retreat, Harriet appeared at her elbow. "Come along, child," the milliner said, linking her arm through Eleanor's. "Let me introduce you properly. You've been hiding in my shop long enough." For the next hour, Eleanor found herself navigating a sea of friendly faces and curious questions. She met the banker's wife, Mrs. Covington, who gushed over the progress of her gown. The blacksmith, Michael Burns, whose massive hands seemed incongruous with his gentle demeanor. The widow Jenkins, who ran the boarding house and insisted Eleanor must come to dinner sometime soon. Throughout it all, Eleanor maintained her careful facade, answering questions about her sewing but deftly avoiding any inquiries about her past. She was beginning to feel the strain of so much socializing when a hush fell over the gathering. Eleanor turned to see what had caught everyone's attention, A group of riders had appeared at the edge of the churchyard, rough-looking men with dust-covered clothes and hard eyes. At their head was a man whose very presence seemed to darken the bright summer day. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a shock of silver-streaked black hair, he surveyed the gathering with cold calculation. "That's Jacob Reeves," Harriet whispered, her fingers digging into Eleanor's arm. "Leader of what's left of the Blackwater gang. They must be passing through." Eleanor felt a chill despite the heat of the day. "I thought you said the sheriff drove them out." "He did, but like bad pennies, they turn up now and again, testing boundaries." Harriet's voice held a note of fear that Eleanor understood all too well. As if summoned by their conversation, Sheriff O'Malley appeared, moving unhurriedly toward the newcomers. Two deputies flanked him, hands hovering near their weapons, but Preston's posture remained relaxed, almost casual. "Reeves," he called, stopping several yards from the mounted men. "Church property is no place for your kind. State your business and move on." The outlaw leader's laugh was like gravel. "Just passing through, Sheriff. Thought we might join the good folks of Caldwell for their social." His gaze swept over the gathering, lingering momentarily on the women. When his eyes found Eleanor, something in his expression changed, a flicker of interest that made her blood run cold. "You're welcome to water your horses at the creek south of town," Preston replied, his tone cordial but firm. "Then I suggest you continue on your way. There's nothing for you here." Tension crackled in the air as the two men stared at each other, years of enmity evident in their postures. Eleanor held her breath, aware that everyone around her was doing the same. Violence seemed imminent, hanging in the air like the promise of a storm. Then, unexpectedly, Reeves chuckled. "Always the protector, aren't you, O'Malley?" His gaze drifted back to Eleanor, and his smile widened. "Some things might be worth coming back for, though." With that cryptic remark, he wheeled his horse around. The gang followed, dust billowing in their wake as they rode away from the churchyard. Conversations slowly resumed around Eleanor, but the carefree atmosphere of the gathering had been irrevocably altered. She stood frozen, ice spreading through her veins. The way Reeves had looked at her, it was the same predatory assessment she'd seen in Thomas's eyes that first time he'd struck her, as if measuring how much she could endure. "Eleanor, are you all right?" Preston's voice broke through her paralysis. He stood before her, concern evident in his expression. "Yes, of course," she answered automatically, her smile sliding back into place, just surprised by the interruption. Preston studied her face. "You've gone pale as a sheet. The heat, perhaps." Eleanor forced a light tone. "I'm not used to the Texas sun yet. Let me get you some water." As he turned to go, Eleanor impulsively caught his sleeve. "Sheriff," she said quietly, glancing to ensure no one was listening. "That man Reeves, he seemed to notice me." Preston's expression hardened. "Jacob Reeves notices anything he thinks he might be able to take." After a pause, he added more gently, "But he won't be taking anything from Caldwell again. I give you my word on that." The conviction in his voice should have been reassuring. Instead, it reminded Eleanor painfully of other promises made by men, promises that had proved worthless when tested. Thomas had sworn to cherish and protect her too, after all. "Of course," she replied, withdrawing her hand. "I'm sure you're right." Something in her tone must have betrayed her doubt, for Preston's gaze sharpened. "Miss Lane," he began, then hesitated before continuing in a lower voice. "Eleanor, whatever you're running from, whoever you're running from, you're safe in Caldwell. I won't let anyone hurt you." The sincerity in his gray eyes was almost her undoing. For a moment, Eleanor felt the mask slip, felt the raw truth of her fear and loneliness rise to the surface. She wanted so desperately to believe him, to trust that this man was different from those who had failed her before. Instead, she took a step back, rebuilding her defenses with practiced ease. "You misunderstand, Sheriff. I'm not running from anything. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should return to the shop. I have orders to complete." As she walked away, Eleanor could feel Preston's gaze following her. She maintained her posture, her smile, her facade of calm composure all the way back to the millinery. Only when she was alone in her small room above the shop did she allow herself to collapse onto her narrow bed, trembling with the effort of containing her fear. Reeves had seen her, had marked her somehow. An experience had taught Eleanor that when men like that took notice, disaster inevitably followed. The following days passed in a haze of anxiety for Eleanor. Every creak of the shop door, every unfamiliar footstep on the wooden sidewalk outside made her heart race with dread. She worked even longer hours, preferring the security of the millinery's four walls to venturing out into the town where Jacob Reeves or his men might appear. Harriet noticed her increased tension, but attributed it to the general unease that had settled over Caldwell since the outlaw's appearance. The whole town seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see if Reeves would make good on his implied threat to return. Sheriff O'Malley and his deputies maintained a visible presence, patrolling the streets at all hours. Occasionally, Eleanor would glance up from her work to see Preston passing by the shop window, his expression watchful. Sometimes their eyes would meet, and she would offer her automatic smile before quickly looking away, unnerved by the understanding she saw in his gaze. A week after the church social, Eleanor was working late again, putting the finishing touches on Mrs. Covington's gown for the Independence Day celebration the next evening. The shop was quiet, Harriet having retired hours ago, and the streets outside had emptied as most of the town prepared for the holiday. The sound of the back door rattling startled Eleanor so badly that she stabbed herself with her needle, a gasp escaping her lips. She froze, listening intently, praying she had imagined it. But then came another rattle, more insistent this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone trying to force the lock. Terror gripped her as Eleanor silently set aside her sewing and moved to the staircase that led to her room. From there, she could see the back door clearly in the dim lamplight. The handle turned slowly and the door began to inch open. A man's silhouette appeared, tall and broad-shouldered, his face obscured by the shadow of his hat. Eleanor's throat closed in panic. Without thinking, she grabbed the heavy iron from her sewing table and brandished it before her like a weapon. "I have a gun," she lied, her voice shaking despite her efforts to sound firm. "And I'll use it if you come any closer." The figure paused, then stepped fully into the light, revealing not Jacob Reeves as she'd feared, but Sheriff Preston O'Malley. "It's just me, Miss Lane," he said quickly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I apologize for frightening you." Relief made Eleanor's knees weak, but confusion quickly followed. "Sheriff, what are you doing sneaking in the back way at this hour?" Preston closed the door behind him, moving with a quiet urgency that set Eleanor's nerves on edge again. "Reeves and his men were spotted at the edge of town," he explained in a low voice. "I have reason to believe they might try something tonight before everyone's on guard for the celebrations tomorrow." "And you think they'd come here?" Eleanor asked, cold dread pooling in her stomach. "Why?" Preston hesitated, his expression troubled. "I can't be certain, but the way Reeves looked at you at the social. I've been keeping an eye on this place, and tonight I saw someone watching the shop from across the street. When I approached, he disappeared." Eleanor set down the iron, her hands trembling too much to hold it steady. "What does he want with me? I've never even met the man before. Reeves doesn't need reasons. He takes what catches his eye." Preston's jaw tightened. "And you, Miss Lane, are not exactly inconspicuous with your Eastern manners and fine dresses." The implications of his words sent a wave of nausea through Eleanor. She'd fled one monster only to attract the attention of another. "We need to get you somewhere safer," Preston continued, glancing toward the window. "My office has iron bars and sturdy locks. You can stay there until we're sure the danger has passed." Eleanor shook her head automatically. "I can't leave Harriet here alone. Doc Winslow's already fetching her. She'll be staying with Mrs. Jenkins at the boarding house tonight." Preston moved closer, his expression earnest. "Please, Eleanor, I wouldn't ask if I didn't believe the threat was real." The use of her given name startled her almost as much as the genuine concern in his eyes. For a moment, she was tempted to trust him, to place her safety in his hands. But years of disappointment and betrayal had taught her the folly of depending on others. "I appreciate your concern, Sheriff, but I can't." Her words were cut short by the sound of breaking glass from the front of the shop. Both of them froze, listening to the heavy tread of boots on the wooden floor. Well, well," came a gravelly voice that Eleanor recognized from the churchyard. "Looks like the sheriff's bird has already flown the nest. Guess we'll have to search upstairs." Preston moved with lightning speed, extinguishing the lamp and pulling Eleanor into the shadows beneath the staircase. His arm around her waist was firm but gentle as he pressed a finger to his lips, signaling for silence. In the darkness, Eleanor could feel the steady beat of his heart against her back, a stark contrast to her own racing pulse. The footsteps grew louder as Reeves and at least one other man moved through the shop, carelessly knocking over displays. "Sheriff's been watching this place like a hawk," said a second voice. "Must be something special about this one." Reeves chuckled, the sound sending ice down Eleanor's spine. "O'Malley always did have good taste. I saw her at the social pretty little thing with sad eyes behind that smile. Reminds me of that schoolteacher over in Abilene." There was a pause, before I got through with her anyway. Eleanor felt Preston tense against her, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. She clutched at his arm, silently pleading with him not to reveal their hiding place. They were outnumbered, and confrontation would only lead to bloodshed. The creaking of the first step on the staircase echoed in the darkness as one of the intruders began to ascend toward her room. Eleanor closed her eyes, terror washing over her in waves. Images of Thomas flashed through her mind, his fist drawn back, his eyes cold with rage. Now history was repeating itself, only with a different predator. Suddenly, a shout came from outside the shop. "Fire! Fire at the saloon!" The footsteps on the stairs halted. "Damn it," Reeves muttered. "That'll bring the whole town running." There was a moment of silence then. "We'll come back for her later. Let's go." The intruders retreated, their footsteps fading as they exited through the broken window at the front of the shop. Eleanor remained frozen in place, scarcely daring to breathe until Preston gently guided her out of their hiding place. "They're gone for now," he said quietly, "but they'll be back." In the dim moonlight filtering through the windows, Eleanor could see the grim determination on his face. He still had one arm around her, steadying her, and she realized with a start that she was trembling uncontrollably. "I'll get you to my office," Preston continued. "It's not far and we can." "No," Eleanor interrupted, pulling away from his protective embrace. "I can't stay in Caldwell, not now." "You can't run either," Preston argued. "Reeves has men all around the area. You wouldn't make it 10 miles before they caught up with you." "Then what would you have me do?" Eleanor demanded, her voice rising with desperation. "Wait here for them to return. I won't be hunted again." "I won't be," she broke off, realizing what she'd revealed. Preston's expression softened. "Again?" he asked gently. "Eleanor, who are you running from?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with significance. Eleanor turned away, moving to the window to look out at the darkened street. In the distance, she could see the glow of lanterns as townspeople responded to the fire alarm, a diversion, she suspected, rather than a genuine emergency. "It doesn't matter," she finally said. "The past is the past." "It matters if it's still chasing you," Preston replied, coming to stand beside her. "And it matters if understanding it might help me keep you safe now." Eleanor studied his face in the moonlight, looking for signs of the judgment or disbelief she'd encountered when trying to explain Thomas's cruelty to others. Instead, she found only patient concern and something else, a warmth that both frightened and attracted her. "My husband," she admitted softly, the words feeling foreign on her tongue after so many months of silence. "I'm running from my husband." Preston's expression didn't change, though something flickered in his eyes. "Is he looking for you?" "Undoubtedly." Eleanor's laugh held no humor. "Thomas doesn't like losing what he considers his property." "Did he hurt you?" The question was gentle but direct. Eleanor hesitated, years of trained silence warring with the desperate need to finally speak the truth. "Yes," she whispered, "in ways I can't speak of." Preston nodded, accepting her answer without pressing for details she wasn't ready to give. "And now you fear Reeves will do the same." "I know he will." Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself. "Men like that, they're all the same beneath different faces." "Not all men," Preston said quietly. Eleanor turned to him, a sad smile touching her lips. "Perhaps not, but enough that a woman learns caution." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of her confession hanging between them. Finally, Preston spoke again. "I have a sister in Austin," he said. "She's married to a lawyer there. I could arrange safe passage for you, letters of introduction. You could start fresh where neither Reeves nor your husband would think to look." The offer stunned Eleanor. "Why would you do that for me? You barely know me." Preston's gaze was steady. "I know enough. I know you're brave enough to flee a bad situation, skilled enough to make your own way, and kind enough that every customer who comes into this shop leaves speaking well of you." After a pause, he added more softly, "And I know that smile you hide behind deserves to be real someday." Emotion welled in Eleanor's throat, threatening to overwhelm the careful control she'd maintained for so long. Before she could respond, however, the sound of approaching footsteps drew their attention back to the street. Through the window, Eleanor could see several figures moving purposefully toward the millinery, not Reeves and his men, but townspeople led by Dr. Winslow. Harriet was among them, her expression anxious in the glow of the lanterns they carried. "They're coming to check on you," Preston explained, moving toward the back door. "I need to rejoin my deputies, make sure Reeves and his men have truly left town." He paused, his hand on the doorknob. "Will you consider my offer about Austin?" Eleanor hesitated, torn between the instinct to flee and the surprising realization that part of her wanted to stay, wanted to know more about the sheriff, whose gray eyes saw through her carefully constructed facade to the truth beneath. "I'll consider it," she finally answered. Preston nodded, relief evident in his expression. "Lock this door behind me. I'll return before dawn to escort you to the Independence Day celebrations. No one will touch you while you're under my protection, Eleanor. That's a promise." As he disappeared into the night, Eleanor found herself believing him despite years of learned caution. There was something about Preston O'Malley that inspired trust, a steadiness, a sense of unshakable honor that she'd thought existed only in novels. When Harriet and the others reached the shop moments later, full of concern about the broken window and rumors of Reeves's men in town, Eleanor greeted them with her usual smile. But for the first time since arriving in Caldwell, it wasn't entirely forced. The Independence Day celebration began at noon the following day, with the entire town gathering in the meadow behind the church. American flags flew from every available surface, and tables groaned beneath the weight of picnic baskets and holiday dishes. Children ran about with sparklers despite the daylight, their laughter carrying on the warm summer breeze. Eleanor arrived on Preston's arm, wearing a new dress she'd finished just that morning, a deep blue cotton with white trim that complemented her fair coloring. She'd spent extra time on her appearance, telling herself it was merely appropriate for the holiday, not an effort to impress the man beside her. "Half the men in town won't be able to take their eyes off you," Preston remarked as they approached the gathering. "The other half will be too busy watching their wives to make sure they're not getting ideas about commissioning similar gowns." Eleanor felt a genuine smile tug at her lips. "You exaggerate, Sheriff Preston," he corrected gently. "At least for today." The familiar way he spoke her name sent a pleasant warmth through Eleanor, a feeling so long forgotten that she scarcely recognized it. She allowed herself to enjoy it, if only for this one afternoon. The celebration was a welcome distraction from the events of the previous night. No one mentioned Reeves or his men, though Eleanor noticed the sheriff's deputies positioned strategically around the perimeter of the gathering. Preston himself never strayed far from her side, his presence both reassuring and increasingly comforting as the day wore on. As the afternoon progressed, Eleanor found herself relaxing, genuinely enjoying the simple pleasures of community and celebration. She joined in a quilting demonstration, showing some of the younger girls' techniques she'd learned in Philadelphia. She tasted Mrs. Jenkins's famous apple pie and complimented the Reverend's wife on her lemonade. And through it all, she was conscious of Preston watching her with quiet appreciation, as if seeing glimpses of a woman she herself had forgotten existed. "You're different today," he observed as they walked along the edge of the creek later that afternoon, having stepped away from the main celebration for a moment of quiet. "Less guarded." Eleanor considered his words, realizing with surprise that he was right. "Perhaps I'm tired of being afraid," she admitted. "Fear has its purpose," Preston replied, helping her over a fallen log. "It keeps us alert to danger, but living in constant fear isn't really living at all." "Is that why you became a sheriff?" Eleanor asked curiously. "To help people live without fear." A shadow crossed Preston's face. "Partly," he acknowledged, "and partly because I understand what happens when there's no one willing to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them." Something in his tone suggested personal experience, and Eleanor found herself wondering about the man behind the badge. "You speak as if you've seen such harm firsthand." Preston was silent for a moment, his gaze on the distant horizon. "My father was a violent man," he finally said, his voice level but tinged with old pain. "He took his frustrations out on my mother, my sister, even our farm animals when the mood struck him. The local sheriff knew what was happening, but did nothing, said it wasn't his place to interfere between a man and his family." Eleanor's heart ached at the familiar story. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Preston shrugged, though the casual gesture couldn't disguise the tension in his shoulders. "My mother finally fled with my sister when I was 16. I stayed behind, thinking I could protect our home, maybe change my father somehow." A bitter smile touched his lips. "Foolish notion." "What happened?" Eleanor asked, drawn into his story despite herself. "He died in a bar fight 2 years later. By then, I'd already decided what kind of man I wanted to be and what kind I didn't." Preston turned to face her directly. "That's why I know not all men are like your husband, Eleanor. Some of us spend our lives trying to be the opposite of such men." The simple sincerity in his voice touched something deep within Eleanor, a place where hope had long ago withered. Standing beside the creek with the sounds of celebration in the distance, she felt a wall inside her begin to crumble. "I believe you," she whispered, the admission costing her more than he could know. Preston's eyes warmed and he took a step closer. For a breathless moment, Eleanor thought he might kiss her and, more surprisingly, realized she wanted him to. Instead, he gently took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "Then believe this too," he said quietly. "You don't have to leave Caldwell. You don't have to keep running. Whatever comes, whoever comes looking for you, you won't face it alone." The intensity of his gaze made it difficult to breathe. "Preston," she began, uncertain what she wanted to say but needing to break the spell of the moment before she gave in to impulses long denied. Before she could continue, a shout from the direction of the celebration shattered the peaceful interlude. They both turned to see one of Preston's deputies running toward them, his expression urgent. "Sheriff," the young man called. "Riders coming. Looks like Reeves and at least a dozen men." Preston's demeanor changed instantly, the gentle man beside the creek replaced by the determined lawman. He turned to Eleanor, his expression grave. "Go back to the church. Stay with the women and children." Fear clawed at her throat. "What are you going to do?" "My job," he answered simply, already checking his pistol. To his deputy he added, "Tell Miller and Johnson to get the men organized. Anyone with a firearm should take position around the perimeter. Women and children inside the church." As the deputy raced off to carry out his orders, Preston turned back to Eleanor. "Promise me you'll stay inside," he insisted. "If things go badly, there's a trapdoor beneath the pulpit that leads to a root cellar. The church was a station on the Underground Railroad before the war. Use it if necessary." Eleanor gripped his arm, terror making her voice sharp. "Don't do this. They outnumber you. Let them take what they want and go." "What they want is you," Preston replied grimly, "and that's something I can't allow." Before she could protest further, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a brief, fierce kiss that left her momentarily speechless. "For luck," he explained with a tight smile. "Now go." Eleanor found herself being ushered back toward the church, along with the other women and children, as the men of Caldwell grimly prepared to defend their town. Through the confusion, she caught glimpses of Jacob Reeves and his gang approaching across the meadow, their horses kicking up dust in the late afternoon sun. Inside the church, women clutched their children close, their faces pale with fear. Harriet found Eleanor near the door, grabbing her arm with surprising strength. "This is about you, isn't it?" the milliner demanded in a low voice. "Reeves is after you." Eleanor couldn't deny it. "Yes," she admitted, "though I don't understand why." Harriet's expression softened slightly. "Men like that don't need reasons, child. Just seeing something they can't have is enough." She glanced toward the church windows. "But Preston won't let him take you, not while there's breath in his body." The words, meant to be reassuring, filled Eleanor with fresh dread. Outside, she could hear voices raised in confrontation, though the thick walls of the church muffled the exact words. The reverend led the gathered women and children in prayer, but Eleanor couldn't focus on the familiar liturgy. All she could think about was Preston facing down Reeves, and his gang risking his life to protect her from a danger she'd inadvertently brought to Caldwell. As the minutes stretched on, tension in the church grew. Some of the younger children began to cry, picking up on their mother's anxiety. Eleanor moved among them, offering comfort where she could, her practiced smile firmly in place despite the fear gnawing at her insides. Then came the sound they'd all been dreading: gunshots. First a single report that echoed across the meadow, then several in rapid succession. Women gasped and clutched their children closer. The reverend raised his voice in prayer, trying to drown out the sounds of violence. Eleanor stood frozen in the center aisle, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. More shots followed, along with shouts and the pounding of hooves. A battle was raging just outside the church walls, men fighting and perhaps dying all because of her. In that moment of clarity, Eleanor made a decision. She couldn't hide while others suffered on her behalf. Couldn't allow Preston to sacrifice himself fighting her battles. Not when there was another solution, one that would end the violence immediately. Moving purposefully toward the door, she ignored Harriet's frantic whisper of "Eleanor, no." The older woman tried to stop her, but Eleanor gently but firmly removed her restraining hand. "I have to end this," she said simply. "No one else should die because of me." Before anyone could prevent her, Eleanor slipped through the church door into the chaos outside. The scene that greeted her was one of controlled violence, the men of Caldwell using wagons and water troughs as barricades, exchanging fire with Reeves's gang, who had taken positions among the trees at the edge of the meadow. Eleanor spotted Preston immediately, crouched behind an overturned wagon, directing his deputies with calm authority even as bullets splintered the wood around him. The sight of him, still alive and unharmed, sent a wave of relief through her so intense it was almost painful. That relief was short-lived as she realized what she had to do. Gathering her courage, Eleanor stepped into the open space between the combatants, her blue dress stark against the dusty ground. "Stop," she called, her voice carrying clearly in a momentary lull in the gunfire. "Stop this now." All eyes turned to her. From behind the wagon, Preston's face registered shock, then horror. "Eleanor, get back," he shouted, already moving to reach her. But Eleanor stood her ground, her gaze fixed on Reeves, who had emerged from the trees with a look of surprised satisfaction. "You want me," she called to him. "Leave these people alone and I'll come willingly." "Eleanor, don't." Preston's voice was anguished as he tried to reach her, only to be held back by his deputies when Reeves signaled his men to train their weapons on the sheriff. Reeves approached on horseback, circling Eleanor with predatory assessment. "Bold move, pretty lady," he drawled. "But why would I leave these fine folks alone when I could take you and still burn their town to the ground?" "Because I have something more valuable to offer than just myself," Eleanor replied steadily, despite the fear threatening to choke her. Reeves raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "My husband," Eleanor continued, forcing the words past her dry lips. "Thomas Lane of Philadelphia. He's offering $5,000 for my return." The lie came easily, born of desperation. Dead or alive? A murmur ran through the watching townspeople. From the corner of her eye, Eleanor could see Preston's stricken expression, the realization that she was sacrificing herself. Reeves considered her words, greed warring with skepticism in his hard features. 5,000 is a mighty specific number for a woman to know about her own bounty. "I saw the telegrams," Eleanor improvised. "Thomas has contacts throughout the Western Territories. He's a very wealthy man and a very determined one. If there's really money in returning you," Reeves mused, "why would O'Malley keep you here instead of collecting it himself?" Eleanor's mind raced. "Because Sheriff O'Malley doesn't know who I really am," she replied smoothly. "I've been hiding my identity, using a false name." The lie hung in the air between them, plausible enough that Reeves tilted his head consideringly. 5,000 would set a man up nicely," he acknowledged. "Better than whatever we might loot from this dusty little town." "Eleanor, don't do this," Preston called, struggling against the men holding him back. Eleanor forced herself not to look at him, knowing her resolve would crumble if she did. Instead, she maintained eye contact with Reeves. "Do we have a deal? You take me to collect the bounty and you leave Caldwell in peace." Reeves grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Deal, Mrs. Lane, though I can't promise the journey will be pleasant." Fear threatened to overwhelm her, but Eleanor maintained her composure, her smile firmly in place though it had never felt more false. "I didn't expect it would be." With a triumphant laugh, Reeves reached down to grab her arm, hauling her up onto his horse. Eleanor bit back a cry of pain as his fingers dug into bruises that had barely healed from Thomas's last assault. "No!" Preston's shout echoed across the meadow as he finally broke free, running toward them with his gun drawn. "Reeves, let her go!" Reeves's men immediately aimed at the sheriff, but their leader held up a hand, staying their fire. Now, O'Malley. The lady has made her choice. $5,000 is a powerful motivator, even for a fine, upstanding lawman like yourself. Maybe you should have asked who she really was before you started playing her protector." "I know exactly who she is," Preston replied, his voice deadly calm despite his heaving chest. His eyes met Eleanor's, filled with a determination that made her heart clench. "And she's not going anywhere with you." Reeves's amusement faded. "You willing to die for this woman, Sheriff? Because that's what it's going to take to stop me from collecting that bounty." "If necessary," Preston answered without hesitation. The simple declaration stunned Eleanor. No one had ever been willing to risk anything for her, let alone their life. The realization that Preston, this man she'd known for barely a month, would face death to protect her shattered something inside her, some final barrier against trust and hope. "Preston, don't," she pleaded. "Please." "I'm not worth dying for." His eyes never left hers. "You're wrong about that." Reeves watched the exchange with growing irritation. "Touching as this is," he interrupted, "we'll be on our way now, unless you want to start a bloodbath right here in front of all these good people." Eleanor could see the calculation in Preston's eyes, the recognition that he couldn't win this confrontation without risking innocent lives. His gun remained steady, but uncertainty flickered across his face. "Wait," came a new voice from behind Preston. Eleanor was surprised to see Dr. Winslow stepping forward, a folded paper in his hand. "Before you take that woman anywhere, Reeves, you might want to see this." The doctor approached cautiously, holding out what appeared to be a telegram. "This arrived yesterday from Austin. Seems a Thomas Lane of Philadelphia has indeed been searching for his wife, but he's not offering any reward." Winslow's eyes met Eleanor's with unexpected kindness. "He's dead, killed in a duel 3 weeks ago after accusing the wrong man of helping his wife escape." Shock rendered Eleanor speechless. Thomas dead. It seemed impossible, yet the relief that flooded through her was immediate and overwhelming. Reeves snatched the telegram, scanning it with narrowed eyes. "Could be a trick," he growled, though doubt had crept into his voice. "The telegraph operator confirmed its authenticity," Winslow replied calmly. "You can check with him yourself. But there's no bounty to collect, Reeves. The lady was bluffing to save our town." Eleanor felt Reeves's grip on her arm tighten painfully as rage replaced greed in his expression. "Then she'll pay for wasting my time," he snarled, reaching for his pistol. What happened next unfolded with such speed that Eleanor would later struggle to recall the exact sequence. Preston lunged forward just as Reeves's gun cleared its holster. A shot rang out, but it came from neither man. One of Reeves's own gang members slumped in his saddle, blood blooming across his chest. Confusion erupted as more shots came from the tree line, not from Reeves's men, but from a new group of riders wearing badges that caught the late afternoon sun. "Texas Rangers," someone shouted. "It's the Rangers." In the chaos that followed, Reeves's grip on Eleanor loosened. Preston seized the opportunity, dragging her from the outlaw's horse and shielding her with his body as they took cover behind a nearby water trough. The gunfight was brief but fierce. Outflanked and surrounded, Reeves's gang quickly surrendered or fled, leaving their leader with diminishing options. Eleanor watched from behind Preston's protective arm as Jacob Reeves, realizing his defeat, made one last desperate attempt to escape, spurring his horse toward the open country beyond the meadow. He never made it. A single shot from a ranger's rifle caught him squarely in the back, toppling him from his horse into the dust. The fall broke his neck, ending his reign of terror with an unceremonious finality that seemed almost anticlimactic after all the fear he had inspired. As the Rangers rounded up the remaining gang members, Preston turned to Eleanor, his hands gently cupping her face. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, his eyes searching hers. Eleanor shook her head, too overwhelmed to speak. Thomas was dead. Reeves was dead. The twin specters that had haunted her were gone, leaving her strangely adrift in their absence. "You could have been killed," Preston continued, a hint of anger coloring his concern. "What were you thinking, offering yourself to Reeves like that?" "I was thinking I couldn't bear to see you die because of me," Eleanor answered simply. "I've had enough of other people paying the price for my troubles." Preston's expression softened. "That's not how it works, Eleanor, not with people who care about you, care about me." She repeated, the words strange and unfamiliar. "Yes," Preston confirmed, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I care about you, more than I should after such a short time, more than I've ever cared about anyone who wasn't family." The admission hung between them, fragile and precious. Eleanor searched his face for signs of deception or manipulation, the instinctive caution born of years with Thomas. She found only sincerity and a vulnerability that matched her own. "I don't know if I can believe that," she admitted, "or if I remember how." Preston's thumb gently traced the curve of her cheek. "Then let me remind you, every day for as long as it takes." A small smile touched his lips. "You don't have to pretend anymore, Eleanor. Not with me. The smile, the brave face, you don't need them. I see you, fear and all, and I'm still here." Something broke inside Eleanor at his words, not painfully, but like ice cracking in spring, releasing what had been frozen beneath. The smile she'd maintained for so long faltered, then disappeared entirely as tears filled her eyes. "I don't know who I am without pretending," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It's been so long." Preston drew her closer, his arms solid and secure around her. "Then we'll find out together." As the Rangers and townspeople moved around them, securing prisoners and tending to the wounded, Preston held Eleanor while she wept not the quiet, hidden tears she'd perfected during her marriage, but deep, cleansing sobs that purged years of fear and loneliness. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Eleanor felt no need to hide her emotions behind a practiced smile. The weeks following the Independence Day battle, as the townspeople came to call it, brought many changes to Caldwell. The Texas Rangers established a temporary headquarters in town, while they tracked down the remaining members of the Blackwater gang. The story of how the small community had stood against Reeves spread throughout the territory, bringing an influx of curious visitors and potential settlers. For Eleanor, the changes were more personal. The revelation of Thomas's death had freed her from the constant fear of discovery, allowing her to speak openly about her past. The townspeople, far from judging her for fleeing an abusive marriage, embraced her with unexpected warmth and acceptance. Several of the women confided similar experiences, creating bonds of understanding that gradually helped Eleanor lower her carefully constructed defenses. Harriet officially took Eleanor on as a partner in the shop, expanding the millinery to include a full dressmaking service that quickly became the pride of Caldwell. The work gave Eleanor purpose and independence, something she'd never fully had even before her marriage. And then there was Preston. True to his word, he courted her with patient determination, never pushing but always present. They took evening walks along the creek, sharing stories of their pasts and cautious dreams of the future. He brought her wildflowers and books from his personal library, delighting in her surprise when he revealed a fondness for poetry that seemed at odds with his rugged exterior. As summer faded into autumn, Eleanor found herself smiling more often, real smiles that reached her eyes and warmed her from within. She still had moments of darkness when memories of Thomas would surface unexpectedly, but Preston's steady presence helped anchor her in the present rather than the past. On a crisp October evening, nearly 4 months after the battle, Preston invited Eleanor to dinner at the small house he owned at the edge of town. She arrived to find the table set with his mother's china, candles casting a warm glow over the simple but comfortable furnishings. "I'm not much of a cook," he admitted as he served a surprisingly palatable stew, "but I wanted tonight to be special." Eleanor smiled genuinely, easily. "It already is." They ate with comfortable conversation flowing between them, discussing the latest town news and Harriet's plans to expand the shop even further. As Preston cleared the dishes, Eleanor wandered to his bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines of well-worn volumes. "I have something for you," Preston said, returning from the kitchen with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "It's not fancy, but when I saw it, I thought of you." Eleanor unwrapped the gift carefully to find a small, leather-bound journal, its cover tooled with an intricate pattern of wildflowers. "It's beautiful," she breathed, touching the soft leather reverently. "I thought," Preston began, a hint of uncertainty in his voice, "that maybe you could use it to write down your story. Not the one you had to live with Thomas, but the one you're creating now, the real one." The thoughtfulness of the gift brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." Preston took her hands in his expression serious. "But there is something I'd like to ask you." Eleanor's heart began to race as Preston lowered himself to one knee before her, still holding her hands in his. "I know it might seem fast," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "And I'll understand if you need more time. But I love you, Eleanor Lane. I love your courage and your kindness. I love watching you rebuild your life piece by piece. And I'd be honored if you'd consider sharing that life with me." Emotion welled in Eleanor's throat. "Preston," she managed, "are you certain? After everything I've told you about my past, about Thomas, more certain than I've ever been about anything," he interrupted gently. "What happened to you doesn't define you, Eleanor. It's how you survived it, how you've grown despite it, that shows who you truly are." Eleanor searched his face, looking for any hint of doubt or reservation. She found only love steady, patient, and unwavering. "I'm still learning how to trust," she admitted. "There are days when I'm afraid to believe this is real." "I know," Preston acknowledged, "and I'll spend every day proving that it is if you'll let me." He squeezed her hands gently. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight. Take all the time you need." But Eleanor found, somewhat to her surprise, that she didn't need more time. In the months since arriving in Caldwell, she had begun to rediscover herself, not the frightened, subservient woman Thomas had tried to create, but someone stronger, someone capable of making her own choices. And she chose Preston O'Malley, with his quiet strength and unwavering integrity. She chose the life they might build together in this dusty Texas town that had somehow become home. "Yes," she said simply, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, I'll marry you." Joy transformed Preston's features as he rose to his feet, drawing her into his arms. "I promise you won't regret it," he whispered against her hair. "I'll spend my life making sure of that." When he kissed her, Eleanor responded with all the emotion she'd kept contained for so long, hope and fear and love mingling into something powerful and true. There was no pretense in her response, no careful smile hiding her true feelings. With Preston, she could simply be herself, unguarded and real. They were married on Christmas Eve in the small church where 6 months earlier, Eleanor had made her desperate bargain with Jacob Reeves. Now the building was transformed with pine boughs and candles, the entire town gathering to witness the union of their sheriff and the seamstress who had become an integral part of their community. Harriet stood as Eleanor's witness, beaming with maternal pride as she watched the couple exchange vows. Dr. Winslow, who had become a close friend to both Preston and Eleanor, gave the bride away with dignified solemnity. As Preston slipped a simple gold band onto Eleanor's finger, his voice steady as he promised to cherish and protect her, she felt the last shadows of her past receding. Thomas's ghost no longer haunted her. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long had finally released its grip. In its place was something she had almost forgotten could exist: happiness, pure and uncomplicated. Not the perfect storybook ending she had dreamed of as a girl, but something better. A real beginning with all its challenges and uncertainties, alongside a man who saw her completely and loved her anyway. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Preston looked down at Eleanor with a tenderness that took her breath away. "No smile," he teased gently, noting her serious expression. Eleanor shook her head slightly. "Not the pretend one," she replied. "Never again with you." And as he lowered his lips to hers, sealing their vows with a kiss that promised a lifetime together, Eleanor Lane O'Malley smiled, a real smile that transformed her face with genuine joy, reaching her eyes and warming every part of her that had once been cold with fear. The townspeople's cheers faded to background noise as Preston drew back to look at his bride, his gray eyes shining with love and pride. "That's the smile I've been waiting for," he murmured. "The real one." Eleanor touched his face, marveling at how completely her life had changed in the space of 6 months. "And it's yours," she promised, "for all the days to come." As they turned to face their friends and neighbors as husband and wife, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges the future might hold, she would face them honestly, without hiding behind a facade of false courage. She had found not only love but the strength to be herself, fears, flaws, and all, with a man who valued her truth above any comfortable pretense. In the years that followed, Eleanor and Preston built a life together that exceeded even their most hopeful expectations. Their small house at the edge of town expanded to accommodate first one child, then another, a son with his father's serious gray eyes, and a daughter who inherited her mother's talent with needle and thread. Eleanor's partnership with Harriet flourished, their shop becoming known throughout the territory for its quality and craftsmanship. Preston continued as sheriff until the arrival of their third child, when he decided to accept a judgeship that kept him closer to home and out of the line of fire that had caused Eleanor so much worry over the years. And on warm summer evenings, when the children were asleep and the house was quiet, they would often sit together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson. In those peaceful moments, Eleanor would sometimes catch Preston studying her face with the same intensity he had shown that first day in Caldwell. "What are you thinking?" she would ask, though she already knew the answer, and Preston would smile, taking her hand in his. "I'm thinking how lucky I am that you stopped pretending," he would reply. "And how beautiful you are when you're simply yourself." Eleanor would lean against his shoulder then, marveling at the journey that had brought her from fear to this profound contentment. The mask she had worn for so long had become unnecessary, replaced by the freedom to express all the complex emotions that made her human, the sorrows and joys, The fears and hopes that Preston had taught her were not weaknesses to be hidden, but strengths to be shared. In finding the courage to lower her defenses with one person, Eleanor had discovered a truth that transformed her life. Real strength lay not in hiding her fear behind a smile, but in acknowledging it and moving forward anyway. And real love wasn't about pretending to be someone else, but about being accepted exactly as she was. It was a lesson worth all the pain that had preceded it, a truth she carried with her through all the years of her new life in Caldwell, Texas, where a sheriff with storm-gray eyes had seen through her careful facade and offered her the most precious gift of all: the chance to be herself, without pretense or fear, for all the days of her life.